The crowd falls silent. The world's most outspoken man, who always challenged kings, politicians, and rivals in the ring, can now barely control his own hands. But still, Muhammad Ali decides to turn his illness into a stage. And in that moment, he proves that life's toughest fight isn't fought with your fists. Muhammad Ali was always bigger than boxing. He was not just a champion, but a symbol of courage, resilience, and pride. His body was made for fighting, his voice for provocation, and his presence for inspiration. But life, relentless as an invisible adversary, dealt him a blow he could not avoid. A diagnosis of Parkinson's, a degenerative disease that robbed him of what he valued most: his speed, his steadiness, his control. For any other man, it would have been a silent end, a discreet retreat, far from the spotlight. But for Ali, never. He chose to face the disease as he faced every fight, with the world watching, in the public eye. Seeing the icon tremble, lose his balance, and choke on words was painful. But it was precisely in this collective pain that he found the strength to remain on stage. He didn't hide, didn't try to camouflage the marks of time and illness. On the contrary, he took 2 stages, lit Olympic torches, and faced crowds to show that, even physically defeated, his soul remained undefeated. This choice transformed his illness into a symbol, a banner of resistance and hope for millions. What we're about to revisit isn't just the story of a champion who shone in the ring. It's the story of a man who, when he lost his reflexes, discovered he could still be quick with his heart. When he lost the steadiness of his hands, he learned to hold the world with courage. When he lost the clarity of his voice, he began to shout through inspiration. And it's precisely in this contrast between the glory of the past and the fragility of the present that Muhammad Ali taught us an eternal lesson. No matter what blows life deals, the fight always continues. The cameras were always ready to capture Muhammad Ali. His every move, in or out of the ring, was followed by eyes hungry for admiration or hatred. He was the man who spoke faster than his punches, who transformed press conferences into spectacles of arrogance and poetry. But there was one detail that, at first, seemed insignificant: a slight tremor in his hand, small, almost imperceptible. In the midst of the crowd chanting his name, no one noticed, but Ali noticed. And like a fighter who senses the body's weakness before any diagnosis, he knew something was wrong. The silence after glory was different. Before, he heard only the echoes of victories, the metallic sound of belts being raised, the applause of entire crowds. Now, alone at home, the champion noticed that his handwriting was no longer the same, that lifting a spoon required more care, that his body, once a war machine, seemed to conspire against him. It was as if the ring had never ended, but the adversary was invisible. "Why don't my hands obey me?" he murmured, looking at them as if they were traitors. The diagnosis didn't take long. Parkinson's, a word that sounds like a sentence. For many, it would mean withdrawing, protecting the image he'd built with so much hard work, disappearing before the decline became public. But not Ali. He faced the news as he faced any rival head-on. "I won't hide," he told those closest to him, his voice still firm but filled with uncertainty. And it was precisely this decision that defined the course of his life from then on. He chose to remain in the public eye, even knowing that each appearance would reveal not his invincible strength, but the fragility that time had imposed upon him. The world's shock was immediate. Seeing the greatest athlete of the century tremble in public, seeing his body falter in simple gestures, was like watching a hero stripped of his armor. But, paradoxically, it was in this exposed weakness that he began to become even greater. Because, unlike many, Ali transformed his own vulnerability into a spectacle of courage. He no longer needed to win in the ring. Now, his fight was different: to teach that dignity is not lost when the body fails, but when the soul gives up. Ali became, before the cameras and crowds, a reflection of human destiny itself. Everyone realized, if even Muhammad Ali could fall, anyone could. But if even Muhammad Ali found the strength to rise, then no one was truly alone. The chapter of illness was beginning, but along with it also began the greatest lesson of his life. And as the tremors grew, the question hung in the air like an inevitable suspense. How long would the champion resist against an enemy he could not knock out? Muhammad Ali's first public appearances after his diagnosis were filled with anticipation and apprehension. The public still remembered the arrogant young man who strutted through the streets, defying presidents, rejecting wars, and predicting knockouts with almost prophetic precision. Now, however, the scene was different. The body that once floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee seemed heavy, slow, and unsteady. Yet, he appeared before the cameras with the same gleam in his eyes, a gleam that never wavered. There he knew that every look he received was also a mixture of compassion and curiosity. Some viewed him with pity, others with discomfort, but he was aware that, at that moment, he was more than a former fighter. He was a mirror for all who lived with illness, limitations, and loss. Therefore he decided that his presence would be a political act, a gesture of resistance. If I disappear, the disease wins twice, he confided to a close friend. He understood that hiding would be denying his own history, denying the impact he could still make. The pinnacle of this courage came in 1996. During the opening of the Atlanta Olympic Games, the stadium was packed, millions watched on television, and no one knew who would have the honor of lighting the Olympic flame. When Muhammad Ali's name was announced, the world stopped. He emerged with slow steps, his arm visibly shaking, his face etched with effort. It was impossible not to feel a tightness in one's chest as one watched the greatest of them all struggle against his own body. But when he raised the torch, amid the reverent silence of thousands, he transformed fragility into triumph. Ali wasn't just lighting the Olympic flame, he was rekindling the flame of hope for all who felt defeated. That moment was historic because it subverted the logic of sport and glory. There were no belts, deafening applause, or shouts of victory. There was a sick man, trembling but firm in his resolve not to hide. Every second of that scene became a powerful reminder. Greatness lies not in never falling, but in continuing to rise even when your body no longer responds. After Atlanta, his image traveled the globe. Parkinson's sufferers, debilitated patients, and families facing illness saw in Ali a kind of shield. If he could face the world without fear of showing his fragility, then so could they. Ali became a voice for the voiceless, and his struggle took on dimensions far beyond sport. With every appearance, with every hesitant gesture, the message was clear: I'm still here. I'm still Muhammad Ali, and I can still inspire. And in that moment, as the audience saw him transforming pain into flame, the question ceased to be one of illness or defeat. It became, how far could this man carry the weight of millions of hopes on his shoulders? And if you've been following this story and have already felt the power of this silent struggle, take the opportunity to strengthen this narrative. Like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what moves you most about Muhammad Ali. This is the way to keep alive the flame he lit. After the Olympic flame in Atlanta, Muhammad Ali became something even greater than a sports icon. He became a human symbol of endurance. But living with Parkinson's wasn't just about facing big stages and ecstatic crowds. It also meant dealing with the silent days, when his body felt heavier than ever and when tremors made simple tasks seem like invisible rings. Opening a door, signing a paper, lifting a spoon to his mouth, all of this required the same discipline that once made him world champion. Ali no longer trained to knock out opponents, but to avoid being knocked out by the routine the disease tried to steal from him. The world saw the big moments, but not the small battles. At home, the family watched each hardship with suppressed tears. His children grew accustomed to seeing their once invincible father asking for help putting on a shirt or climbing a few stairs. He seemed fragile, but he was still the strongest person in the house, one of his daughters would later say, because, even in moments of pain, Ali found ways to smile, to joke, to encourage. He used humor as a shield, as he always did. When his voice failed, a look was enough to convey courage. At public events, this duality became even clearer. The audience greeted him with applause and tears, but also with that respectful silence that betrays the discomfort of seeing an idol weakened. There, he could sense it. He knew that each tremor was not just a symptom, but a reminder of the relentless passage of time. Still, he never backed down. If his body failed, he relied on that which never abandoned him, his ability to inspire. It was as if he was saying to every eye that observed him, yes, I am trembling, but you would tremble too in my place, and yet, you would remain alive. The sports world, which had previously exalted him solely as a boxer, now revered him as an example of humanity. Younger champions, stars of various disciplines, came to him seeking words, but they received much more than advice. They received living proof that glory doesn't end when the body fails, it merely changes form. Seeing Ali shake hands with effort, smile through spasms, and remain present in places where he could have chosen to disappear was a spectacle of courage. But it wasn't just a personal act. There he understood the symbolic weight of his exposure. He knew that each appearance also conveyed a political and social message. It was telling the world that people with degenerative diseases didn't need to be hidden, that they shouldn't be erased from public life. His body spoke, even when his voice no longer reached the masses. It was a silent cry against prejudice, against exclusion. against the fear of facing what we all, sooner or later, will face: vulnerability. And as the cameras captured his weary smile, it became increasingly clear Muhammad Ali was no longer just a boxer. He was the starkest reflection of the human condition itself. Fragility transformed into a banner, pain transformed into strength, and with every faltering step he took in public, an unspoken phrase repeated itself like a mantra: "I'm still standing." The world watched, divided between sadness and reverence, but a certainty began to grow. Perhaps this was his hardest fight, but it was also, without a doubt, his most universal victory. As the years passed, Muhammad Ali's fight against Parkinson ceased to be merely personal and became a collective battle. He began to lend his image to campaigns, organizations, and movements focused on raising awareness of the disease. Each public appearance was calculated not to display his fragility, but to show that there was still strength in exposing oneself. It was a powerful reversal. The man who had previously been celebrated for his invulnerability now became an inspiration precisely because he showed himself vulnerable, and this transformed the way the world viewed not only the boxer, but also the human being behind the legend. With each speech, even when his voice wavered, Ali conveyed firmness. He often needed help standing or holding a microphone, but the silence that fell when he began to speak was absolute. The words came out slowly, drawn out, but heavy as punches. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is facing fear even while trembling," he would say. Drawing applause from crowds who understood the message beyond the speech impediments, Ali was teaching that greatness does not end with youth, nor with illness. It remains as long as a person chooses to continue being useful, to continue inspiring. Behind the scenes, his family played a crucial role. His wife, children, and grandchildren became part of this silent resistance. They adjusted his routine, cared for his diet, accompanied him on trips, and protected him during his most stressful moments. But they were also witnesses to his unbreakable humor. Even weakened, Ali found opportunities to spout provocative phrases, as he had in his golden years. Once, to a young boxer visiting his home, he murmured with a wry smile, "I'd still beat you in a race to the kitchen." The boy laughed, but behind the joke lay a lesson. Illness didn't rob him of the essence of who he always was. At charity events, Ali appeared to raise funds and give a voice to those who suffered in silence. His presence multiplied the attention and the spotlight, transforming Parkinson's into a global issue. He sought not pity, but dignity. He refused to be remembered merely as a victim, but as a warrior who used his visibility to open doors. And every time he sat at a charity table, or when his image was displayed on giant screens, the world understood that Ali's fight was no longer for golden belts, but for something infinitely greater, giving hope to the forgotten. Still, there were moments of darkness. At night, away from the crowds, Ali would stare at his reflection in the mirror and see not only the champion he once was, but the man who now depended on others for his survival. This intimate confrontation was painful. He, who had once declared himself the greatest, needed to accept the smallness imposed by time, but instead of denying this new reality, Ali transformed it into yet another test. He knew that the body could be defeated, but faith and determination could not. This blend of public and private created an even more intense portrait. Muhammad Ali was no longer just the boxer who felled giants, but the man who, trembling before everyone, continued to hold his head high as if to say, "I no longer fight to be the greatest. I fight to show that never giving up is true greatness." And so, with each new appearance, with each trembling gesture transformed into a symbol, Ali established himself as something beyond sport, a hero who faced not a flesh and blood opponent, but time itself. In the final years of his life, Muhammad Ali no longer possessed the agility that once mesmerized crowds. His body, once compared to a perfect machine, now moved slowly, overcome by spasms and tremors that betrayed the relentless force of the disease. Still, he continued to appear in public, even when each step seemed to weigh a ton. Many wondered why he hadn't chosen silence, why he hadn't kept himself away from the cameras. But that was never Ali's essence. His presence, however fragile, was an act of courage, a way of shouting to the world that dignity isn't lost when the body fails, but when one stops fighting. The last events he participated in revealed a man already transformed into a living monument. When he appeared in sports arenas, he was no longer the boxer everyone expected to see with his fists raised, but a silent master who carried in his eyes a story greater than any title. Entire crowds rose just to applaud his resilience. Just being there, exposed, was a victory in itself. His trembling gestures carried more weight than his once famous punches. Every tired smile was a reminder that, even with his illness, Ali remained Ali. His home became both a refuge and a temple. Friends, family, young fighters, and public figures visited him not only to pay their respects but to hear the wisdom of a man who faced his own finitude without losing his essence. The champion used few words, but each one seemed to resonate with the same force as his speeches during his glory days. One of his recurring phrases was simple and devastating: "Don't count the days. Make the days count." It was as if each syllable carried the experience of someone who knew what it meant to watch time slip through your fingers. With his family by his side, Ali found his last strength. His children described him as a present man, still playful, still stubborn. Even in the worst crises, he found ways to smile. Sometimes, he would simply raise an eyebrow, as he did in his provocations in the ring, and the whole house would fill with laughter. He understood that his mission was no longer to fight with his fists, but with hope. He transformed every gesture into a lesson, every day into a silent victory. The news of his death in 2016 was not received with the weight of defeat, but as the conclusion of a fight that will never be forgotten. Millions around the world mourned, but also celebrated, because Muhammad Ali didn't just leave behind records or belts. He left a human legacy, a message that resonates to this day. Greatness lies not in never falling, but in rising even when all seems lost. His fight against Parkinson's was perhaps the most brutal of all. There was no referee, no rounds, no crowd to declare victory. But somehow Ali prevailed, because he transformed the disease into a banner, pain into inspiration, and fragility into collective strength. And so, his final lesson lives on: the body may fail, but courage, when exposed to the world, becomes eternal. Muhammad Ali proved that a champion is not measured solely by the blows he lands, but by how he faces the blows he cannot return. And in this silent duel against time, he earned the greatest title of all, that of immortal inspiration. Muhammad Ali ended his journey in a way few men can, not only being remembered for what he achieved, but also for what he endured. The boy from Louisville, who once dared to challenge the world with his sharp tongue and swift fists, ended his life waging a silent battle against an enemy that could not be punched. And it is precisely in this contrast between glory and fragility that his story becomes universal. Because, deep down, Ali didn't just face Parkinson's, he faced prejudice, pain, the uncomfortable silence of those who prefer not to look at vulnerability. He raised his image to say that weakness is not shameful, but an essential part of the human condition. Ali's greatness lies not only in his stacked belts or his historic fights against Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, or George Foreman. These achievements placed him at the top of the sport, but they don't explain why his name still echoes decades after his last fight. What makes him eternal is his courage in exposing himself when his body no longer responded, in not hiding when he had every reason to retreat. Instead, he chose to show the world that, even trembling, even faltering, he could still inspire millions. He taught that the real fight doesn't happen in packed stadiums, but in the silence of everyday life. When you have to get up every day, even without strength. Ali left us a legacy that goes beyond boxing. He showed that dignity isn't about remaining impeccable, but about remaining steadfast in the face of inevitable failure. That courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about facing it head. That life isn't measured by titles, but by the lives we touch. The fire he lit in Atlanta wasn't just Olympic, it was human. It was the flame of someone who decided to illuminate others even when his own light seemed to be fading. And so, his death wasn't a knockout, it was the end of a long and arduous battle, a victory he won because he never gave up. Today, every person facing a chronic illness, every family living with limitations, finds in Ali a role model. He became a beacon not only for the strong, but especially for those who feel fragile. Because he showed that fragility can also be strength when shared with courage. Muhammad Ali's legacy isn't confined to statues or medals. It's confined to the reminder that life will test us in relentless ways, but it's still possible to face the invisible enemy with dignity. Looking back, we see not only the greatest boxer in history, but a man who turned Parkinson's into his final ring. And in that ring, even though he couldn't win, he found a way to avoid defeat. The lesson he left is simple and devastating. The body may fail, but the soul, when it refuses to give up, remains undefeated. And that's why Muhammad Ali didn't die in 2016. He lives on in every person who struggles against their own limitations, in every gesture of silent resistance, in every heart that trembles but doesn't give in. Because, in the end, Ali proved that being a champion isn't about knocking down opponents, it's about staying on your feet, even when your own body insists on falling. And so, In his last and most difficult fight, Muhammad Ali won the title he would never lose, that of eternal inspiration.